Hey up, Moonlit Night 81. I just watched one of your videos from a couple of days ago called "If you don't like the military, you can fuck off." So I wanted to talk about some of the stuff you said in that, 'cause I think I disagree with some of it. Now, where do we agree? The main point of your video, I fundamentally agree with, absolutely, is that you should hold to account the policymakers, the decision makers, the politicians. That is where the blame must lie, at the feet of. You know, 100% agree with the main point of your video. So with that in mind, I'm going to talk about a few of the things that you said. And I am not a war historian, I'm not an expert on this subject, these are just opinions that I'm going to put forth, really. We can of course agree that the military is a tool. And, you know, yes, they do go where the politicians send them, and maybe we could also agree that actually it's a majority of the conflicts that we've been engaged in over the last several decades that have either been unnecessary or straight out illegal and deplorable. You know, Iraq, Vietnam, the Falklands. Could we agree that the majority of conflicts we've been involved with have not been necessary, or have been invasions, they've not been defence, you know, they've been an oppressive attacking force thing rather than any kind of genuine defence. So if we can agree on that, I think we can agree that the military has not been used in a respectable way by the powers that be. Okay. You said that Vietnam vets were bitter because they see support for troops these days, or since Vietnam, as when they were returned from Vietnam they were spat on, that kind of thing. Yeah, I can understand why they'd be bitter. I feel like you kind of glossed over some of the reasons that the soldiers were vilified after coming back from Vietnam by some of the people. We know what went on there, you know. I mean, you say that all they were doing was exercising the policies of the government, but I don't think you can displace all of the blame of what happened there onto the government. I mean the actual individual acts, the stuff that actually went on there. So I'm just going to read from one report from the Associated Press in 2003, and this is just one of obviously many reports of this kind of thing that went on. So, okay, an elite unit of American soldiers mutilated and killed hundreds of unarmed villagers over 7 months in 1967 during the Vietnam War, and an army investigation was closed with no charges filed. The Blade reported on this. Soldiers of the Tiger Force unit of the Army's 101st Airborne Division dropped grenades into bunkers where villagers, including women and children, hid, and shot farmers without warning, the newspaper reported. Soldiers told the Blade that they severed ears from the dead and strung them on shoelaces to wear around their necks. The Army's 4.5-year investigation, never before made public, was initiated by a soldier outraged at the killings. The probe substantiated 20 war crimes by 18 soldiers and reached the Pentagon and White House before it was closed in 1975, the Blade said. William Doyle, a former Tiger Force sergeant now living in Willow Springs, said he killed so many civilians in 1967 he lost count. We didn't expect to live. Nobody out there with any brains expected to live, he told the newspaper. The way to live is to kill, because you don't have to worry about anybody who's dead. So this is the kind of thing that the public were disgusted by, you know. Now, of course, we can get into the argument that these men may well have been so affected by the horrors of war that they became barbaric almost as a survival strategy. You know, their minds were warped by the horrors of being involved in that kind of situation, that climate. You know, carrying out the government's dirty work, being thrust into this unimaginable, horrific circumstances, situation. So yes, you know, I would still hold those who make the decisions to engage in those conflicts and send those men over there more accountable. Absolutely, I would. So I'm not saying that these men are inherently evil men. I think there's a lot to be said for the argument of, you know, indoctrination or conditioning, or mine's been warped by being in a horrendous fucking situation. I mean, do I know that I wouldn't become stir crazy in such an environment? You know. Obviously, I can't say that I definitely wouldn't. So, you know, you put these men into life or death situations, or worse than that, expose them to unspeakable stress, and there is a case for how these kind of conflicts can totally warp minds. So, I don't want to be ignorant of that fact. But then you get into the question of, you know, are the kinds of men who become soldiers, do they have some kind of predisposed capacity for killing without personal reason and being barbaric, or are they conditioned to become that way? That's a complicated question in itself. I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question. I'm sure you've got a lot to say on that, and I'd be interested to see what you think about that. And also, I'll put a link in the description to the series of videos that you might have already seen about Iraq war soldiers' testimonies of that conflict and how it affected them. So, but here's the thing, though. So we can look at the suicide bombers schools in the Middle East, and we can easily say that that's fucked up, yeah. So why don't more people have this opinion of the military? I mean, there is a level of indoctrination and conditioning that goes into that. You know, these men are toughened up, battle hardened kind of thing. You have to, if you take the position that, the men in the military are good men, kind of thing, you have to be conditioned to be able to kill another person on command. Somebody these are other fucking human beings who are doing it for just the same reason as you are. They've been sent there by somebody else. So this us and them, this evil and good thing, doesn't make any sense from an objective point of view, really, because both camps, both sets of soldiers are being sent there by the power mongers, by the people in control, and they both sets think they're doing what's right for their people. They've both been conditioned to think that they're fighting the just war. No soldier goes into a war on either side thinking, I'm the baddie. You said that the US hasn't been invaded since the late 1800s, and you basically suggest that this is because the military has kicked a lot of ass, basically. I'd have to kind of disagree. I mean, I personally, again, I'm not a war historian, but I can't name one conflict that hasn't been an invasion rather than defensive, or that's been just straight out illegal in the last several decades. I mean, I would argue that the main reason the US hasn't been invaded is because it runs the show economically and politically, across the world. The US has its fingers in so many pies that a lot of the world's economy really relies on the US. So I'd say that the economic pressure and stance or position of the US is more of a reason why it's not been invaded than having a strong military. Let's not forget, the military-industrial complex is big business. Yeah, I mean, it's not just the soldiers on the front line. I mean, do we need the vast stockpiles of nuclear weapons that we've got? Absolutely fucking not. It's obscene the amount of nuclear weapons that the US has got, and the UK. Yeah. So the amount of money spent on defence is obscene. We can probably agree on that, given the fact that we have no fucking need for the amount of nukes we've got, and all that kind of shit. Yeah. And given the fact that we know we sell equipment, guns, tanks, blah blah blah, weapons. We sell this to our fucking supposed enemies. We know this. We arm the Middle East, but all that money could be being spent, to encourage employment or to sustain public services that will benefit the very people who are typically being exploited by the military, which is the poor. You listed a few names of rich and famous people who you think you'd never see volunteer, and I totally agree that it's detestable that by and large, the rich are not the ones that are being put on the front lines. Wars are fought by poor men for rich men. That's a fucking stone cold fact of how war works, isn't it? The poor men, the men with less advantages, less options, less potential to develop themselves in other ways, can always fall back on the military to give their lives for their country that doesn't really seem to be doing much to support them, really. I mean, you don't even have a national health service. I'm sure that's one of the most basic provisions that a country would give all its people if it was going to be, if the government, the country would be respectable enough to do something like put your life on the line for it. So I guess this comes down to my main kind of problem with your video, really, is you say you support bringing back selective service. If you support this, doesn't that mean that you are there saying that you trust the government to only ever send these men to their deaths for genuine defence reasons? Because that's not what the military's been used for over the last several decades, as far as I'm concerned. I'm no historian, but you did qualify that by saying that you prefer some kind of broad national service where people could either go do military or some kind of humanitarian aid thing or domestic service. But I don't mean to strawman you, so it's like I want to recognise that you said that. But what I would suggest is that if you do have a national service where people could simply choose to only be involved in humanitarian aid activities, don't you think that if they need more troops on the front line, that they wouldn't just call those men up as well? you know, I don't know how that would work. Again, I'm ignorant of that, really, how that would work. But at the end, you said, you know, people, this question of JFK's statement, you know, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. It sounds nice, doesn't it? It sounds like a nice soundbite. It sounds honourable. But it's propaganda bullshit, in my opinion. You say no one asks that question anymore, but what does this country do for the majority of the demographic that make up the military? Talking about the poor here. So I guess, you know, I mean, my main point is that, yeah, again, I would agree that the vast majority of the blame needs to be placed at the foot of the decision makers. But by supporting selective service and national service, as we call it here, you are then supporting the government's decisions. You're supporting how they run the show. So there's not as much of a disconnect between the two entities as you would make out if you support national service. And I find it, I would find forced conscription to be pretty fucking totalitarian bullshit, basically.